Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is how far away the SNP were to their 2030 targets for emissions and what would have been required to actually bring them back online. It's nuts. They're absolutely bonkers. Just before I start, people often ask how can I help the channel? Dead simple, click the thumbs up down the bottom of the screen. Does wonders for us. Thank you. Now, this story is in The Scotsman, where they spoke to Maihri McAllan of the SNP, and she told them a wee bit more about the background to the SNP abolishing their 2030 target for CO2 emissions. So, the headline is, exclusive, McAllan admits taking cars off-road tomorrow would have kept climate target intact. Yep, you heard that right. That's how far off the target they would have had to have taken cars off the road tomorrow to get it back online. SNP Net Zero Secretary Maihri McAllan said she faced taking cars off the road tomorrow to keep her 2030 climate target on track. The SNP Net Zero Secretary has revealed she faced scenarios including taking petrol and diesel cars off the road tomorrow in order to keep Scotland's 2030 climate target on track. Maihri McAllan announced on Thursday that the Scottish Government flagship target to cut 1990 levels of emissions by 75% by 2030 was to be scrapped. The move could lead to the end of the SNP's power sharing deal with Scottish Greens, with Greens co-convener Patrick Harvey saying yesterday he does not know whether the coalition can continue. Ms McAllan told The Scotsman that since she became Net Zero Secretary in March 2023, she had asked her officials to investigate whether the 2030 target could be met. She admitted some of the modelling presented to her was not legal or in line with just transition to net zero. Now, I need to stop here. This woman has asked her advisors for ideas on how we could stay on target for this crazy high 2030 scenario. They've come back to her with things that are not legal. Well, what sort of advisors are you asking? If these people are meant to be specialists in climate, protection, whatever it is you want to call it, they come back to her with modelling presented to her that was not legal. You're probably asking the wrong people, Maihri. However, I digress. Asked by The Scotsman if her target was too slow to act, asked by The Scotsman if her government was too slow to act when warnings were made about the 2030 target, Ms McAllan said, I didn't want to be in the position that I'm in. Right, well, that's not answering the question. So Maihri didn't want to be the net zero minister. You bet he took her wages. Having come into post, I took time and challenged my team to seek to find ways of retaining the legislative framework as it stood. That required me to take advice, to run models, to find out what I would have to propose to the people of Scotland in order to make 2030 target. Some of them were just not legal, feasible, in line with a just transition. There were certain things that the model threw back, including taking petrol and diesel cars off the road tomorrow. These are just not policies I would ever consider implementing. But I had to go through that process. Wow. I think now is the time. It comes a number of weeks after Climate Change Committee finally confirmed that 2030 to 75% was not doable. Last month, the CCC, that's the Climate Change Committee, the UK and Scottish Government's independent advisors warned Ms McAllan that the 2030 target was no longer achievable, but the alarm did not come out the blue. Well, of course it didn't. Our own people couldn't figure out how to work it, so it should never have been out the blue, and she's been at this job for a year. How it took the CCC to get involved to tell her, you're crackers, this ain't happening, beggars belief. When MSPs discussed the target before putting it into law in 2019, the CCC cast doubt on the 2030 goal. Chris Stark, the chief executive of the CCC, said the implications of a straight line path to net zero was a 2030 target between 64 to 68%. that's where they were, the CCC. But the Scottish politics decided they wanted more ambition. Now, this is just another great example. In 2019, Nicola Sturgeon was the leader of the SNP and the First Minister of Scotland. And like a lot of things that she'd done between 2019 and 2021, she wanted to tartanise it. So the CCC, who give recommendations and guidelines to both Westminster and Holyrood, they were saying back then that a target should be 64 to 68%. But no, Nicola didn't want to listen to these experts, these people that are put in position to advise both governments. She wanted to be more tartan and made it 75%. However, the CCC suggested a range of policies that could help meet the 2030 target earlier, including an earlier start to engage engineered greenhouse gas removals, the early decarbonisation of the Grangemouth cluster, and an accelerated scrappage of high carbon assets, such as boilers and cars, and additional retrofit of hybrid heat pumps. Scottish Government didn't push any of those early. Mr Stark said, these options were not pursued by Scottish Government, not least because of the pandemic and post-pandemic challenges. Okay, so where my head is with this, if Mr Stark's trying to cut them a bit of slack by saying, COVID came about, well, let's extend it to 2032 and just hit your targets. Because that's what you're suggesting. It was just the pandemic that caused them not to be able to hit their targets. The broader implications of all this can be easily overstated, but this ultimate lesson is that incredible targets are unlikely to be met. These are the targets the Scottish Government set, despite the CCC advising them of something about 20% lower. The Scottish Greens will hold a vote on the future of its Butte House agreement with the SNP amid anger from party members over ditching of the 2030 target. Mr Harvey insisted he wanted the partnership to continue and described the looming vote as the most important decision in their history. Appearing on the Sunday show on BBC Scotland, he said, over the next few weeks we have probably the most important decision to make that we've ever had to make about the future of our party, and I want to make sure we are listening to each other over those few weeks. My worry is that if we walked away at this point, we would decelerate climate action. Asked how he thought the vote would go, he answered honestly, I don't know. I share the anger about the situation that Scotland is in, that we are years behind where we should be. And I want to make sure that we are all listening to each other and making sure that we genuinely understand and share not just a sense of urgency and a deep disappointment and anger about the facts that Scotland is not on track at the moment, but focus and determination on action. My worry is that if we walked away at this point, we would decelerate the climate action. We would see the hand strengthening of the likes of Fergus Ewing, backbencher in the SNP now, who's constantly popping up and having a go at environmental policy and urging the government to slow it down. This is a critical moment for the future of climate policy and Scotland, which is the reason the Greens are in politics in the first place. My instinct is that we will achieve far more by staying in government. Now, he goes on to talk about other things like the puberty blockers, but I'm going to cover that in a separate video, so I won't go into that at this point. But it is a bit strange to hear Patrick Harvey say this is a critical moment in the future of climate policy and Scotland, which is a reason Greens are in politics in the first place. I would like to remind Mr Harvey and his party of that line, and they should keep their stupid heads out of other things like transgender, sexuality, etc., etc. Because it's not your bag. You are an environmental party who have somehow managed to move into gender and sexuality, etc., which is a bit strange. However, I digress. So, there we have it. Scottish SNP were that far off their own set targets. Remember, they overstretched on the UK targets. They were that far away that a genuine consideration put to their minister for net zero was take cars off the road tomorrow. These people are barking. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing. And the most important thing of all, as long as you are not the SNP's net zero minister, Patrick Harvey, any of the SNP cult, Nicola Sturgeon or Humza Yousaf, every other person in the world, have a great day. Cheery bye now.